Next presentation will be given by Dr. Sarbani Ghosh Lashkar. Ma'am is Senior Consultant Radiation Oncologist at Tata Memorial Hospital.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'd like to start by thanking the organizers for this kind invitation. And I know this is a room full of surgeons and very few non-surgeons in the crowd. So I just thought when we talk about newer modalities of targeted radiation, it is pitching radiation against surgical modalities for treatment of early glottic cancer or early laryngeal cancers, and how have we addressed this issue in radiation oncology. Now, whenever we think about any treatment modality, and especially for the larynx, we consider various factors which are related to the patient, the tumor, and of course, treatment. And these are the factors that finally determine what is the treatment that we are going to choose for a particular patient. The other important thing is, of course, the endpoints of interest. We, as oncologists, know that good disease control is of paramount importance. Besides that, in the glottic larynx, what is also important is preservation of organ and function. And in the larynx, it is important to preserve the voice, swallowing, respiration, reduce the chances of aspiration with an acceptable quality of life. So, when I talk about in the next 10 minutes, what I'm going to address is how effective is radiotherapy, why are we worried with radiotherapy, essentially because of the sequelae, is there a need for superior techniques, is there evidence to support this, and the conclusions thereof. So when we look at the management algorithm of early glottic cancers, that is stage T1, T2, N0, external beam radiotherapy has always played an important role. And here, typically, we use very small fields, and we all know why. And essentially, that is, unlike the other head and neck sites, we do not expect any lymphatic spread. And the goal of therapy, of course, is cure laryngeal voice preservation with optimal voice quality. Now, if we look traditionally at the local controls achieved with radiotherapy, what we can see very clearly is that for T1, T2, it would be anywhere between 82 to 94%. In the T2, it would be around 72 to 80%. If you look at survival again, from our own data, we know that the cause-specific survival is around 96%, 10-year survival around 96%, overall survival 88%, 10-year survival around 83%, and laryngectomy-free control about 85%. Now, it is important for us to know this data when we move or shift gears from a conventional modality of treatment to a more sophisticated or advanced modality of treatment. Now, what does literature tell us when we compare transoral laser surgery to radiotherapy? All of you are very aware of several studies and several systematic reviews, as well as meta-analysis that have been done, and also the equipoise that we have in literature about the optimal treatment for T1A glottic cancers. And what all these series show us is that the overall survival, disease-specific survival, local control, and larynx preservation rates in the optimally selected patients is almost comparable between the various series that have evaluated transoral laser resection versus radiation therapy. What is it that is then different between these two groups of patients? We then talk about the quality of voice. Now, we did this small study at Tata Memorial Hospital where we looked at the various factors affecting the quality of life in early glottic cancer, quality of voice in early glottic cancer treated with radiotherapy. And we realized that for the various types of tumor, there was definitely an impact on the voice quality, especially before and after radiotherapy. And the prominent factors that had an impact on quality of voice were a history of smoking, anterior commissure involvement, use of larger radiotherapy volumes, and these had poorer outcomes. There was no significant impact of age alone. T2 tumors had an inferior voice quality before treatment, but this usually did not remain inferior following radiotherapy, and hypofractionated radiotherapy did not show any negative impact. and there seemed to be an improvement in the quality of voice following radiotherapy. Now, there is only one randomized trial that actually compared the effect of voice quality for early vocal cord cancer. And in this particular trial, done out of Finland, there were 60 patients who were randomized to receiving radiation therapy or laser surgery. And what we do realize is that when we talked about breathiness and asthenia, compared between the two modalities of treatment, there seemed to be better outcomes with the use of radiation therapy. Also, there seemed to be better outcomes on the impact on everyday life. The results showed that the overall voice quality between the two groups were essentially similar, but voice was more breathy and the glottal gap was wider in patients who underwent laser surgery than those who received radiation therapy, and patients who received radiation therapy reported less hoarseness-related inconvenience in daily living 2 years after treatment. It can be the treatment of choice in patients whose requirements for voice quality are demanding, indicating a need for careful selection and consideration of patient-related factors in the choice of treatment. And this is the publication, and it also looked at the outcomes in terms of disease control, and it clearly tells us that the larynx preservation rate was similar in both groups of patients. Now, if you look at the various current surgical and non-surgical treatment strategies, again, based on the equipoise in oncologic and functional outcomes after transoral laser surgery and radiotherapy, informed and shared decision-making with and not just about the patient poses an important aspect, especially when we are selecting our patients for treatment with early glottic cancer. And these are the various series that have been used and reported in this systematic review by Olgun. Now, when we come to comparison of voice quality, most studies conclude that transoral laser and radiotherapy lead to voice impairment, and recovery takes place in the majority of patients by about 6 months post-treatment. Acoustic characteristics may be better with radiotherapy, but there is a lack of trials specifically addressing the effect of fraction size on voice impairment. So are we worried after radiotherapy? From our own data, we realize that there are some important sequelae that happen even after we've managed to control the patient in a certain group of patients. What are those concerns? Laryngeal edema, dose to the opposite cord, sometimes cartilage necrosis, requirement of tracheostomy, fistula, dose to the carotid, stenosis and stroke, and hypothyroidism. Now, we did realize sometime early on, this is data, this is a paper published in 2002, perhaps the first paper that looked at the incidence of ischemic strokes after radiotherapy for the neck. And they looked at 367 patients with head and neck tumors. 162 patients had laryngeal cancers, 114 pleomorphic adenomas, and 91 parotid tumors. The risk factors for stroke, other factors, hypertension, smoking, hypercholesterolemia, diabetes were all registered. After a median follow-up of 7.7 years, what they found was that the expected risk of strokes in the population was about 2.5. In this population, the relative risk was about 5.6. They saw 14 cases with stroke, which is about 2.5%, and this was 8 in the laryngeal cancers, 4 in the pleomorphic adenoma patients, 2 in the patients with parotid carcinoma. 5 of the 6 strokes in patients irradiated for a parotid tumor occurred at the ipsilateral site. Other various factors that also were included revealed that hypertension and diabetes mellitus in these patients who received radiation therapy actually had an increased relative risk after radiation therapy. So if you look at the characteristics of these patients, median age at stroke is not very different from the general population. Median interval to treatment, actually from treatment to occurrence of the stroke increases as time goes by. And these are important revelations from patients who have received radiation therapy. And if you look at the average incidence of strokes in this group of patients, in the presence of patients who were less than 60 years of age but had other comorbidities, the irradiation of the ipsilateral neck actually put these patients at a higher risk. This was again further another study which looked at a population of patients looking at the incidence of carotid artery stenosis after radiotherapy for head and neck cancers, and it varied from anywhere between 7% to 18% depending on what we've irradiated. Now, the other important consideration of patients who are receiving neck radiotherapy is the occurrence of hypothyroidism. Yes, it is a correctable condition, can be easily treated, but we need to reduce the morbidity of treatment as much as is possible. There are various other papers. The reason I selected this paper was that hypothyroidism was more common if the height of the radiation field was more than or equal to 7 centimeters or if the patient had been operated. The reason for selecting this is that when we talk about early glottic cancers, we usually select small fields for treatment. We don't have to radiate the node, but at the same time, we need to keep this in our minds. Now, what do we do when we treat these patients with radiotherapy? We usually radiate the neck with small portals. This is a typical portal in which we treat the entire larynx. And this is the kind of dose distribution that we get when we treat these patients with conventional radiotherapy with bilateral fields. Now, what can we do differently in these patients then? And if we can do things differently, how could we do it? Like we use intensity modulated radiation therapy for other sites in the head and neck region, what we could definitely do is decrease the volumes of tissue that we don't need to irradiate unnecessarily. For example, we could reduce the doses to the opposite uninvolved cord, the opposite carotids, muscles of swallowing, but we have several concerns. This is a condition that we can treat effectively, control patients, and have long-term survivors. So it is very important to address this issue very critically. And the concerns essentially are the uncertainties in the movement during swallowing at the vocal cord. Hence, if we look at the literature, most of this work has been done in Rotterdam, and they started very early on. The first and foremost thing done was they used 4-dimensional CT scans to analyze the movements of the vocal cords. And they found that the vocal cord breathing motions were small relative to their separation. Hence, this is not a limitation when we are considering single vocal cord irradiation. The other thing was during the delivery of radiotherapy itself, is there a consideration that we have to keep in mind, which means in radiation therapy or radiation oncology parlance, it is the margins that we give the tumor, the GTV, the CTV, and of course the PTV, and they realize that if you give a left-right margin of about 3 millimeter, a craniocaudal margin of about 5 millimeter, and an anteroposterior margin of about 3 millimeter, most of these tumors could be encompassed adequately. The other important consideration was that when we treated these patients with partial larynx with volumetric arc radiotherapy, that is another form of intensity modulated radiotherapy, we need to ascertain the position of the larynx, need to look at its motion, and see to it that we do encompass the tumor every time when we are treating the larynx, and hence with soft tissue image guidance and margins accounting for respiratory motion, this is not something that we should be scared of. Now, this led to the genesis of using conformal radiotherapy for T1A glottic cancers. And as I said already, most of the evidence comes out of the Rotterdam group, initiated by Peter Leeuwendack. The first was a series of 164 patients with T1A cancers. The local control and overall survival were anywhere between 93% to 83%. Quality of life was evaluated in 89 of the 164 patients, and in only about 3.3% of patients, they found hypothyroidism. Now, if you look at the doses to the critical structures, if you look at the doses to the targets, they were comparable across whether you did single vocal cord, bilateral vocal cord, or if you treated with traditional fields. Also, if you look at the doses to the uninvolved structures, they could be lowered with the use of intensity modulated radiotherapy. The dose to the thyroid glands could also be lowered, and so also the doses to the opposite or the contralateral carotid arteries. And these are the DVHs or the dose volume histograms showing the same. And this is the kind of distribution that you can get when we do these localized radiations for the vocal cord. Now, this is further validation of the same program, And what we do realize is that the voice handicap index actually improves with time, and also the acute toxicity is within acceptable limits. This is a further follow-up of the same group, from the same group of patients, and they studied about 111 consecutive patients with early stage vocal cord, and 41 months follow-up. What they realized was there was improvement in the voice handicap index, and also the 5 years laryngectomy-free survival was to the tune of 98%. And if you look at this, what you realize is the comparison between the different series. There seems to be a good result in terms of outcomes. And the important considerations are image guidance, dose per fraction, number of fractions, overall treatment time, and of course, we need to measure the effects of control, voice outcomes, and effective salvage. These are other regimes and other studies that are being done to essentially use hypofractionated schedules with this kind of contained volumes, and they have reported their this is a thing where they have actually given constraints to the opposite carotids in an attempt to again reduce the doses to the uninvolved structures. This is a study that is ongoing, and will be comparing transoral carbon dioxide laser surgery versus single vocal cord irradiation in patients with stage 0 and stage 1 glottic cancer. We've also tried further shortening the treatment of time and treating patients with this kind of therapy, and this is a study from David Schwartz group, which actually looks at doing SBRT. That is, they started with a schedule that was protracted fractionation, then 45 in 10, and then of course to 42.5 in 5. This is our own experience. Early days, we got treated 11 patients with IMRT for glottic cancers, of which only 4 were early glottic cancers. And this is the kind of distribution that we can get and achieve. And of course, we have been trying to reduce the morbidity with the use of intensity modulated radiotherapy. And this is evidence from the DARS study, which typically tells us that if we use DARS optimized IMRT, it is possible for us to result or to have patients who have better swallowing function compared to standard IMRT. So my take home, changing the paradigm of radiotherapy treatment for early glottic cancer involves careful and critical planning. It is dosimetrically superior for doses to other uninvolved structures. It is feasible and safe, but needs to be done under image guidance and strict quality assurance. Effective clinical utilization of hypofraction schedules is what it can result in. Acceptable acute sequelae, better voice quality. Of course, mature follow-up is necessary to establish effective reduction of long-term sequelae, and we should not forget paying attention to voice rehabilitation and supportive care in this group of patients. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sarbani ma'am, for such an informative talk. I think we don't have time for questions, and we'll move on to the next session.
Thank you.